One of the most insidiously destructive and damaging ways that childhood trauma, childhood neglect, and childhood abuse can show up in adulthood is that sense of shame that a person learns to carry about with them. And shame is the ultimate rejection of the self. And Brene Brown does a fabulous job of differentiating between shame and guilt. Guilt is looking at a behavior and saying, okay, I could have done a better job there. That wasn't ideal. Whereas shame is, I am a bad person, I am wrong, there is something inherently wrong with me. And because children are egocentric, when their carers are unable to meet their needs, or when they abuse the child, or when they harshly criticize the child, or humiliate the child doesn't assume that there's an issue with the carer or that their carer could possibly have their own insecurities going on. They assume that there's something inherently wrong with them. And once that idea is internalized, it's very difficult to undo, and it can impact subconsciously on every aspect of your life. And it shows up in so many different ways. It shows up as jealousy and feeling a need to compare yourself to everybody else. It shows up as feelings of inadequacy or indeed superiority. I mean, again, we sometimes oscillate between the two and don't really make the connection that either one is a disconnection from the self. It can show up as being very judgmental of the self and of other people. It can show up in some very socially acceptable coping mechanisms, such as overworking or consuming too much sugary foods or fatty foods, over exercising, feeling a need to reach perfectionist standards in every facet of your life, ignoring your needs in relationships, and finding yourself in relationships that don't actually serve you or meet any of the needs that you perhaps missed out on as a child. The illusion of control, feeling that you have to be on top of everything, feeling that you have to control other people and control all other circumstances, and creating anxiety as a consequence. And then you have the more, I suppose, socially unacceptable coping mechanisms, such as drug addiction and alcoholism and eating disorders and depression and anxiety, and all of these things that require substantial help. However, you don't have to be an alcoholic or a drug addict in order to be suffering immensely as a consequence of your childhood. It's just recognizing that when your needs aren't met as a child, you find it very difficult to have them met as an adult because you inherently believe that you're not worth them being met, that they don't count. You have a poor sense of self, and this ongoing feeling of emptiness no matter what you do externally. So you might chase after all of the promotions at work, or you might chase after certain relationships or certain achievements, or you might try to change how you look physically because you can't even look at yourself in the mirror. And ultimately you still have that feeling of worthlessness, that feeling of emptiness and sadness inside of you. And that healing needs to come internally, and I think a lot of us try to do what is referred to as a spiritual bypass. We just want to bring ourselves into positivity mode, so we repeat all of the affirmations and we read all of the self-help books and we assume we can just think ourselves happy. However, the healing work needs to be done, and it takes time. It takes a lot of care and nurturing, and generally needs the assistance of somebody who is relatively neutral, because oftentimes we don't recognize the way in which we view the world. We don't recognize the impact that our childhood is having on our perception of ourselves and our interpretation of other people, and how we feel about our day-to-day life, and the way in which we behave, the way in which we respond to our circumstance. And it's about recognizing that the temptation is always going to be to want to run from the pain, and consequently we find ourselves always trying to soothe using external sources and never actually getting there. We're always trying to numb out, we're always trying to avoid dealing with the pain of our past, and it's just looking at kind of recognizing that, first of all, you're never going to fix any of this stuff through external methods, and you cannot use positive affirmations to run your way through your heartache and your feelings of rejection, because ultimately, as I said, this is about rejecting yourself, because that is your core belief of who you are as a person, that you're no good. And again, that can also result in a lot of anger towards the self, a lot of anger towards other people. And there's so much going on in the world that is evidence of very shame driven behavior. You know, there's violence, there's hatred, and again, it all comes from this inherent belief of the self as being inadequate. Because again, if we can't find love and acceptance for ourselves, we're going to find it very difficult to have compassion and understanding for other people. So it's recognizing that when you do this work, it's not just about you, it's about your family, it's about your relationships, it's about the impact that you have on the world, and it's about breaking the generational cycle that is passed down from family to family, generation to generation, of pain, inadequacy, shame, and embarrassment for who you actually are, you know. And it's just recognizing that an awful lot of the solutions that we try to apply to this sort of wound are basically band-aids. I mean, as I said, this takes a lot of commitment and diligence, and it can be very painful work. I mean, it can be really humiliating and a form of mourning to realize that your parent just wasn't able to love you the way that you needed to be loved. And that can take a while to sit with. But once you recognize that it wasn't intentional necessarily, and this was just something that they did or didn't do out of a place of suffering and pain, and that it is your responsibility to heal through it, that just because you internalized a belief in your childhood does not mean that you have to live by that belief for the rest of your life, that it is possible to heal, that it is possible to become more aware of your emotions and your triggers and your irritabilities and your feelings of insecurity and uncertainty, and the mechanisms that you use to try and regulate these intense and uncomfortable feelings, and also recognize the stories that you have in your mind about yourself and about other people, and begin to challenge them gently and compassionately, to reparent yourself, to find a way to sit with whatever it is that comes up, and to be able to tell yourself a kinder, more compassionate story about who you are and about what your place is in the world, because our self-talk is so important, and our capacity to sit with our emotions is equally important. Being able to recognize why we feel a certain way, what our triggers bring up in us, but also being able to tolerate them and transcend them, as opposed to trying to numb out or avoid dealing with them, and consequently being on autopilot and them actually running the show, as opposed to us being in control relatively of what impact they have on us. If you would like to work on this, or if any of this content resonates with you, get in touch with me on the website. It's fundamentals.ie.